physical reality is a shadow of a larger reality. And I was blown away when I first saw that, because that's exactly what the Bible's been saying all along. We have all been trained in Euclidean geometry, three-dimensional worlds. Einstein made scientific history by recognizing that we really live in 4 dimensions by adding time to the mix. Time is a physical property. We know that we live in at least 10. That's the current dimensions. 4 of them are directly, we can experience them. But we know there's 6 others that we can't get at directly, but we know we can infer their existence mathematically. What makes that provocative to people who've discovered that is that a Hebrew sage by the name of Nachmanides, back in the 13th century, predicted that from studying the text of Genesis. He concluded that our universe has 10 dimensions, only 4 are knowable, to use his term, and 6 are not knowable to us. And I find that fascinating, because we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on atomic accelerators to discover what Nachmanides did by studying the text. So the 10, some say 11, there's some debates among mathematicians about details, but there's awareness within the advanced scientific community that we live in more than just the 4 dimensions that we directly experience. If we take those things that are larger than us, larger than man's reach, and just lump that and call that the macrocosm, we suddenly are confronting astronomy, astrophysics, those kinds of things. The great discovery of 20th century science is that the universe is finite. It may be expanding, but it's finite. And that has staggering implications. That means it has a beginning, and it'll ultimately have an end. And that's what gives rise to these conjectures that go under the label of the Big Bang theories. There's 4 of them. None of them quite satisfactory, but that's the common conjecture, if you will. The point being, that's an acknowledgement of the fact that we're dealing with a finite universe that had an origin. But the fact that it's finite is my point at the moment. If we go the other way, looking at what's smaller than man, call that the microcosm, that gets even weirder, because you and I would think that if we took, say, a length, a piece of string or something, and we cut it in half, we'd take whatever we have left and cut it in half again. And at least, maybe not physically, but conceptually, you think we could, whatever we have left, we can cut in half. It turns out, we discover, shockingly, that when you get 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and you try to divide that, what we have there loses a property called locality. And that there's a term in physics of a characteristic called locality. And that observation has actually been proven in the laboratory. In 1987, they actually demonstrated non-locality. Every photon in the universe somehow is directly connected to every other photon. And that defies our normal thinking of space, if you will. But the point I'm getting at is, we live in what we call physical reality has a limit in smallness, and we call it the Planck wall, because whether it's length, mass, energy, or time, it's made up of units that you can't divide. So there's a limit to smallness. There's a limit to largeness. So what we discover what we call physical reality is a digital simulation. And there was an article in Scientific American, June of 2005, which was dealing primarily with the fact that constants in physics seem to be changing, but they make the observation that's profound, that if the constants of physics are changing, that implies that our physical reality is a shadow of a larger reality. And I was blown away when I first saw that, because that's exactly what the Bible's been saying all along. And so that leads to a conjecture that the universe, created with 10 dimensions, something occurred to restrict us to the 4 that we experience. Many of us, because of passages in the Bible, Romans 8, and that in Genesis 3, when God declares war because of the fall of man, the creation was made subject to the bondage of decay, the entropy laws and all of that. Apparently we're somehow tied to God's curse on everything we know about the creation is post-curse. Prior to the curse, it may have had 10 dimensions, and for some reason was fractionated. So that some of us tend to regard those 6 inaccessible dimensions as the domain of things like angels, the domain of paranormal behavior. And it's our suspicion that the UFOs somehow are trafficking from those dimensions into ours. And that, it turns out that if you try to speak about dimensions more than 3 or 4, the average person can't relate to it without special training. There are only 2 people that really relate to that. That's mathematicians with special training or small children. And so, but what we can learn a lot about dimensionality by going the other way. You and I are 3-dimensional beings. Imagine if we had a 2-dimensional universe, a piece of paper or a flat plane. We could imagine at least 2-dimensional beings in there. If we had 2 of those, getting from one to the other by them would be unthinkable. But we as a 3rd-dimensional being could pick them up and move them over. To them a miracle has happened, beyond their understanding. If I as a 3-dimensional being put my finger through their 2-dimensional world, they wouldn't see my finger, they'd see a thing that was a ring, and then it would shrink as if a ball passed through, it would appear as a dot that would become a ring. In other words, it only would be seeing the intersection of that 3-dimensional thing with their 2-dimensional world. So we begin to get some feeling for what dimension. Another example, if I have 2 beings there in that 2-dimensional world, I could put my finger 1/millionth of an inch away from each of them, no matter where they are. I can enjoy greater intimacy with each of them than they can with each other. So we certainly read the whole concept of an additional dimension starts to, you get a feeling for what that might mean. The evening of the resurrection, they were gathered in a room, frightened, doors were locked, 6-sided space, 4 walls, a floor and a ceiling. They're there, nervous. And who shows up right in the middle but Jesus himself? At first they're frightened, naturally, confused, thinking maybe he's a spirit or something, and he challenges them. He says, handle me and see. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bone as you see me have. So he, in his resurrection body, has some peculiar properties, because he apparently, obviously, has the ability to enter and leave a 6-sided space without passing through the 6 sides. And a mathematician can deal with it. There's ways of mathematically dealing with that. To a mathematician that's skilled here, he would argue that it would take at least 11 dimensions to do that the way it seems to be described. Fine, whatever it is, it is. John, in his first letter, in chapter 3, verse 2, makes an interesting remark. He says, beloved, it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we shall know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. What I hear that saying is that we will enjoy the same dimensionality he has. If I show you a picture of me, I'm showing you a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional object. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that's more comprehensive. We shall see him as, we will be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So that gives us a glimpse of what the resurrection body that the Bible talks about deals with. But again, see, we're going into what would be called technically a hyperspace, more than 3 dimensions. And that's not easy to do with. I spend more of my time, and as I try to promote the Bible in various contexts, I spend most of my time undoing the effects of bad science. Most of what we're taught in college, not just high schools, is not true. Astronomy is obsessed with gravity, and if you get outside the solar system itself, gravity becomes a non-player. The plasma physicists have been trying to tell us that for years. No one's listening. So that's why we did Beyond Newton as we went into all of that. The electric sky, the fact that when you get out to galaxies, you're talking about electrical behavior, not gravitational behavior. The astronomy world hasn't discovered that, because gravity's instinctive. The James Clerk Maxwell equations are not instinctive. It takes very special study. They behave very different. And that's what David Bohm got coming out of the plasma world, became so fascinated with, and he's the one that predicted at least the possibility that the universe may be really some kind of super hologram. And now they're beginning to get some suggestive evidence that may be true. But again, the scientific community continually, well, I should put it the other way, our educational establishment continues to feed the kids stuff that is just not true. The nebular hypothesis, the birth of the planets, provably not true, and yet it's still taught at the college level. If you take a course in astronomy, you'll get exposed to the so-called nebular hypothesis. And not that it's shreddable, it's mathematically impossible. You've got 99% of the mass is in the sun, and yet 99% of the angular momentum in the planets. How do you get there? It turns out you can't. They were brought here. And what's so interesting, as we learn more of good science, it's converging to the very image the Bible tells in the first place. The 4 dimensions that Einstein discovered are listed in Ephesians 3:18. And you could go on and on, example after example, the zero-point energy. Some of the most advanced concepts in the field of astrophysics are in the Bible, but just not recognized because of that disjuncture.
After all these years, it finally happened. The US government has come out saying that they've recovered, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this earth. This top-secret Pentagon report is said to confirm everything UFO researchers have been saying for years. The Roswell crash, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Skinwalker Ranch, all confirmed by actual declassified US government documents. But why now? Why is the government releasing all this info right now? The world is on the brink of chaos. We have COVID-19, riots in multiple cities across America, growing civil unrest, and some say we're on the brink of a new civil war. So why the sudden rush towards UFO disclosure? Well, it's simple really, and former President Ronald Reagan has the answer to this question.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
In order to understand what's happening in regards to UFO disclosure and the admission by the government that they've recovered craft not made of this earth, you need to look at the Bible. The Bible is 100% clear on this matter, and it proves that these UFOs are not piloted by so-called space aliens, but rather what we would call fallen angels. In fact, the Bible talks about a great end times deception involving UFOs, but we'll get into that a little later in this video. Right now, we're going to take a look at some of the latest articles coming out on this matter. On July 23, 2020, Tucker Carlson shocked the world when he said this on his live Fox News broadcast.
This is a Fox News alert. There are new findings tonight in the search for extraterrestrial life. The New York Times reporting that a secretive Pentagon unit tasked with investigating UFO sightings is quite likely releasing some of its findings soon, and those findings could be stunning, particularly for people who have doubted the existence. The Pentagon has been conducting classified hearings on UFOs for more than a decade. We know very little about what they've found. But apparently, just recovered are off-world vehicles not made on this earth. That's a direct quote.
The following day, multiple articles were released, going into more detail. The Intelligencer reports on July 24, 2020, quote, the Pentagon has reportedly found off-world vehicles not made of this earth. Also, Fox News releases an article entitled, quote, with Pentagon UFO unit in the spotlight, reports mention off-world vehicles not made of this earth. Let's take a closer look at this Fox News article. Quote, a long-hidden UFO investigative unit within the Pentagon will make some of its findings public, according to the New York Times report. The unit, which is now part of the Office of Naval Intelligence, has spent over a decade discussing mysterious events in classified briefings. According to the news outlet, a government contractor told the Times that he gave a classified briefing to the Department of Defense in March, describing retrievals from, quote, off-world vehicles not made of this earth. The Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force at the Office of Naval Intelligence was described in a Senate Intelligence Committee report last month. The unit standardizes collection and reporting on unidentified aerial phenomenon, any links they have to adversarial foreign governments, and the threat they pose to U.S. military assets and installations, the report says. However, the committee remains concerned that there is no unified, comprehensive process within the federal government for collecting and analyzing intelligence on unidentified aerial phenomena, despite the potential threat it added. The New York Times reports that a small group of government officials and scientists believe that objects of, quote, undetermined origin have crashed to Earth and been retrieved, including former Senator Harry Reid. While some have been found to be man-made materials, there are question marks over others. The publication cites Eric W. Davis, an astrophysicist who worked as a subcontractor and a consultant for the Pentagon UFO program. Davis, who now works for defense contractor Aerospace Corporation, said he also gave briefings on the recovery of unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee on October 21st and October 23rd, 2019, respectively. The article goes on to say, in speaking with the New York Times, Reid said he believes the government and the private sector may have retrieved materials from unidentified objects. After looking into this, I came to the conclusion that there were reports, some were substantive, some not so substantive, that there were actual materials that the government and the private sector had in their possession, Reid said in an interview. Reid's comments are the latest from the former lawmaker. In June 2019, he told Nevada's KNPR that he wished lawmakers would hold public hearings into what the military knows. He said they would be surprised how the American public would accept it, Reid said during the wide-ranging interview. Why do you think they're so confident people will accept it? Could it have anything to do with the inundation of propaganda material such as ancient aliens and the like? Now, for those of you who are unaware, there was a man named Bob Lazar who claimed that he worked in a secret government facility named S4, and his job was to try and reverse engineer these off-world vehicles and try and figure out how they worked. There was a decades-long drama surrounding Bob Lazar and his story, but many independent investigators and journalists have concluded that yes, he is telling the truth. Recently, Bob Lazar was interviewed on the popular Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and he said something that would go on to send shockwaves through the UFO community.
At least one of them was part of an archaeological dig. So it's old. At least one of them is old. I don't know if it was the one I worked on, but I remember something to do with an archaeological dig. That means it's not just old, it's ancient.
So Bob Lazar is claiming that at least one of the 9 off-world vehicles was found in an archaeological dig. Interesting. The Bible tells us about a time like this, a time long ago filled with high technology, genetic manipulation, sorcery, and wickedness. We refer to this time as the antediluvian era, or the time before the flood of Noah, which also coincides with the New Age teachings of Atlantis. Christian author G.H. Pember wrote extensively about this in his book entitled Earth's Earliest Ages. Timothy Alberino does a good job at breaking this book down in his Alberino analysis. Here is a clip of that video.
Concerning the days of Noah, Pember has much to say. He believed that the very same vices that led to the judgment of the great flood in the Second Age were destined to be repeated in the closing chapter of this present age, and so lead to the final judgment that will descend upon the earth in a fury of fire before the coming of the Lord. He takes particular interest in what he terms the eruption of fallen angels into the world of men, as recorded in Genesis 6, which subsequently fomented an explosion of rebellion and wickedness that brought the world to ruin. Pember defines 7 causes of antediluvian corruption and analyzes the extent of their influence in the society of his day. As we review these 7 points, we must keep in mind that they were written in 1876. They may be summed up as follows: a rapid progression in the mechanical arts and the consequent invention of many devices whereby the hardships of the curse were mitigated and life was rendered more easy and indulgent. Also a proficiency in the fine arts, which captivated the minds of men and helped to induce an entire oblivion of God. The appearance upon the earth of beings from the principality of the air and their unlawful intercourse with the human race. It should be abundantly apparent to any rational mind that these 7 causes of antediluvian corruption are not only present in the society of the 21st century, but have greatly metastasized and grown to full maturity since the late 19th century, when Pember first recognized them in the dawn of their infancy. In other words, Although these 7 points accurately describe the days in which George Pember lived, they are frighteningly more relevant to the days in which we now live, portending the imminence of the final judgment and destruction of this world, and the return of the King.
Now, Jesus Christ himself warned us about this when he said in Matthew 24:37, quote, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Are we living in the days of Noah 2.0? I believe the answer to that is yes, and this UFO disclosure is just the tip of the iceberg. Alright, let's continue on. In order to understand the next piece of this puzzle, we need to take a look at Skinwalker Ranch and the Defense Intelligence Agency's secret program named Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, or AATIP. By the way, I have a video on Skinwalker Ranch. Please check it out if you haven't seen it already. You can find a link in the description or in the top right corner of the screen. Okay, so back to AATIP. Investigative reporter George Knapp reports that a high-level Pentagon official visited Skinwalker Ranch during the AATIP investigation. While he was there, something strange happened to him. He had an experience. Upon further investigation, the Pentagon actually came to the conclusion that what was happening there was demonic in nature. Here is George Knapp telling the story in his own words.
The Skinwalker story comes to the attention of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the scientist who sees it. He goes to Bigelow, they go visit the property. He has an experience. Something appears inside a house that only he can see. He doesn't say anything about it. He goes back to Washington, meets with Harry Reid in the Capitol and 2 other U.S. senators. He presents them a study of UFOs and related phenomena, not just like AATIP, looking at flying saucers that encounter a U.S. military, but something more expansive. They put out a contract. Bigelow creates an organization called BASS, puts together a team of experts, 50 or 60 employees, looking at whether there are connections between flying saucers, possible aliens, and all these other different phenomena. The program goes on for a couple of years and somebody yanks the funding. The reason that the DIA suddenly became worried about all this weirdness that was being reported at Skinwalkers because they thought it was demonic. And they thought we might be invoking Satan in here. These were fundamentalist Christians in the Pentagon who pulled the money because they thought it was the devil.
They pulled the money because they thought it was the devil. You see, the Bible talks about this end times deception, where demonic entities will trick mankind into believing that they are space aliens coming down upon the earth. Luke 21:26, quote, "Men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken." Sounds a lot like an alien invasion, doesn't it? Now let's take a look at some clips of some prominent Christian researchers and authors and see what they have to say about this matter.
But I don't believe that there's life elsewhere in the universe. That was. I don't think we've got brothers and sisters on some other planet someplace. I don't hold to that view at all. What's interesting is with the abduction phenomena, it parallels what we see in Scripture. It really does. If these are fallen angels, they have the same properties and the same abilities as the good angels have. And so we see when Peter is in the jail cell, chained to a wall, a good angel appears to him. Peter looks around. He's not sure he's asleep or awake, mind fog. Angel tells him to get up. Peter gets up. His chains fall off of him. Manipulation of space, time, and matter. The jail cell opens up by itself. There's no lock. There's a lock, but there's no key to that. Jail cell opens up. Peter finds himself in the hallway. All the Roman guards are switched off. They're asleep. Roman guards who fall asleep fall on their own swords the next day. Thank you. So Roman guards don't fall asleep. They go outside to the courtyard. The gateway opens up by itself, the huge prison gate. They walk a little bit. The angel disappears. That is exactly the same type of circumstances and dynamics that we see in the alien abduction phenomena. People are switched off, matter is floating through walls, floating through this. It's the same deal. The fallen angels are doing the same stuff that the good angels do, only for very nefarious means. And this abduction phenomena, I've interviewed Dr. Jacobs, and it's nefarious. The ending of this thing, I believe, is incredibly malevolent, very nefarious. It's not good for human beings at all. And I think, as Jacobs believes also, that this abduction phenomena and so-called subsequent breeding program has reached its conclusion.
I think they're real. I think they're absolutely real, and I think that they are a major deception, a major part of deception, though. In the end days, I think that we're going to see out of the skies, we're going to see, because that's where the Scripture locates what in the Greek is called cosmic crowders, archon. These beings are there. And part of end-time deception, you see the numbers just off the charts nowadays. So I think they are absolutely real. They are there. They're not what the world thinks they are. When Jesus said that in my Father's house there are many realms, many rooms, that's the word he used. So I think it is dimensional. Whether it's layered or just multi, that I don't know. But I think there's realms different than ours, and they're just beyond us or around us. But I think that they're realities also. And I think that's where we're seeing things coming through to our side from those other realms. We need to understand them as the Spirit of God reveals them in the original Greek, cosmocrator, archon, exousia. These beings were different in species or type. I mean, they're all the same in nature, but they are huge in the sense of, in comparison to humanity. They're a superhuman. They're beyond us. So when I think in terms of us contacting them, like we deal with deliverance, there has to be a doorway for them to get over. If this is kind of the wall between the worlds here, and they're wanting to get over, and biblically we know this in dealing with deliverance, they want to get over to this side. There's no question. So the issue is, how do they come through the barrier? How do they come physically through, or to where they're manifesting through? So I believe that means there has to be a gateway, doorway, portal. A Greek word used is topon, a legal access, but the idea also of a way. So I think that on this side of the fence, if we have learned what I believe would be given by them occult means, whether that's psychic meditations, ritual summonings, sacred tones, whatever the method in calling across through this barrier, that is a call, that is a summoning. We as believers in Christ, we call on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. We read in Psalm 68, summon your power, O God. So the laws of engagement are the same when it comes to the dark side. Now here's the biggest issue I have with the dark side. It's all absolutely real. They're more than they're more than we can even imagine. But the other Greek word I want to always emphasize is meticulous. The word that says when Satan's able to masquerade, transfigure as an angel of light, that's the physics of the dark side. Literally to be able to morph their appearance without changing their nature.
Well, UFOs are obviously unidentified flying objects. Some are man-made, some are from some other source. The popular concept is that a UFO is an alien spacecraft piloted by aliens from some other world, some other star system. I personally don't believe that, having worked in a project with Dr. Teller, Edward Teller. The UFOs we're seeing today are primarily all satanic vehicles, and we have built a number of these underground and undersea bases for these fallen ones, and we were getting our technology from them, and we were letting them do genetic experiments on humans and animals here. In the late 70s, just after I left the organization, in the late 70s, we were kicked out. Humans were kicked out of our own bases by these alleged aliens. They had us build infrastructure to build technologies that they needed in a war that's coming, are going to finish anyway, against Jesus, Yeshua.
I think the evidence points to only one thing, that these so-called space aliens are not from space at all, but rather they're fallen angels who live in another dimension, and they will stop at nothing trying to convince mankind that they are saviors of this world and we should follow their lead at all costs.